We are affiliated with Brigham Young University and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. However, these classes are intended for a general audience, and please keep that in mind with the questions that you answer during the session today. And we'd be happy to answer any more church-related questions via the virtual help or the email address noted on the blue screen. We would like to thank Sister Sorensen for the time that she spends preparing for this class and for presenting it. Having taught classes myself, I know that it is a considerable sacrifice of time and effort, and we certainly appreciate that. And we'll now turn the time over to her. I'll unshare my screen so that she can share hers.
Okay. Good afternoon, if it's already afternoon where you are. My name is Jerroleen Sorensen, and I am a volunteer missionary at the BYU Family History Library. And today's class, I had my interest sparked in this by reading a couple of books about social history, and also by reading the book Mastering Genealogical Proofs by Thomas W. Jones. And I thought that maybe a lot of other people might get some good out of knowing a little bit more about how to use sources to make inferences. So this is why I'm teaching this today. And it's called Putting Your Family History into Context, using historical sources to make inferences, or who's who in my family. Let's see. Okay, so a lot of us have had this question. I can't find a birth marriage. I can't find a death record. I can't find a marriage record. What am I going to do? I don't know how to find my ancestor. Well, the answer to that question really is it isn't just about vital records, okay? Oftentimes when we start genealogy particularly, we think that it's all about finding a birth record, finding a marriage record, finding a death record, or at least some kind of cemetery record or something like that. But of course it isn't really. It's about finding the person that we're looking for. It's about finding their life, about finding who they were, where they lived, what kinds of things they enjoyed doing, whether they were a farmer or a miner or a homemaker. So it isn't just about vital records, it's about a lot of other things. And this is one thing that will, number one, help you to learn about those other things that you're going to be looking for, and also learn how to use them so that you can actually find those dates and those places and those wonderful things about your ancestors. Now, today we're going to mainly talk about that major goal of genealogy, which is to identify correctly our ancestral relationships. We have to make sure that we've identified them correctly, because otherwise our family tree goes off in a kind of a weedy field that isn't really true. And a lot of people, when they first start genealogy particularly, they look at the relationships that other people have already put into trees, or who have already written family group sheets or whatever other things that they've found. So they'll accept those relationships without even trying to find out whether they're true or not. So this is not a good idea. We don't want to accept uncritically the relationships that were established by other people. I trust people, but I also know that I make mistakes, and other people also can make mistakes. So I want to find out and make sure that those mistakes are not on my tree. Now, usually determining a relationship means that we have to find out the identities of a person, whether it's the parent, spouse, child, aunt, uncle, cousin, whatever it is. We can do that in a lot of different ways, including through the use of inferential genealogy, which is what we're talking about today. And we may use sources that are not necessarily considered to be vital records. So if you're going to do those or find those relationships, you're going to have to seek facts about people and events that relate to your ancestor in some way, and it isn't necessarily birth, marriage, and death. You have to evaluate those facts that you find, and you have to interpret the relationships that are there. Now, sometimes it seems like somebody, for example, was born to a certain father or a certain mother, usually it's the father, And it turns out that that is not true, that that's not a true relationship. So this is the kind of thing we're looking for, ways to make sure that those relationships are true. So the question you may have is then, what is inferential genealogy? And this is the definition. I'll move my tab here. So inferential genealogy is a methodology whereby family historians can deduce ancestors' identities by using information from different sources, published or unpublished, and finding the context of the ancestor's life through community and day-to-day existence. So you're not just looking for dates, you're not just looking for places, you're looking for the context of your ancestor's life. Now, it can be very helpful when you can't find records, or you find records that don't actually specify the relationships. It provides more information than just simply doing record searches. A lot of times, if you just do record searches, you're not going to find that ancestor. It can help you break down brick walls sometimes, or solve puzzles, or answer questions that you may have that the records don't answer. It can answer those questions concerning the events that happened during the lifetimes of ancestors and how those events relate to your ancestors themselves, and situate your ancestors in the history of their time, both local and national and global. You can find information about so many things. It gives insight into the daily lives of your ancestors and why they made the decisions that they made. Why did they come to the United States, for example? It takes more effort, definitely takes more effort. It is very easy to do boom, boom, boom. I got my marriage, I got my death, I got my birth, I'm done. That's really not that hard to do, but it can be a lot, in fact, it is a lot more infinitely rewarding and satisfying. You'll be much happier with your genealogy if you do it this way. So how do you do it? The steps in inferential genealogy are actually the same steps as in just about any genealogical research that you want to undertake. And I went through these steps when we did the wiki series that I did, because these steps are fundamental to genealogical research. And if you're not doing it this way, then you may want to try it and see if it doesn't help you do a better job or do it more easily with any of your research that you're doing. So with inferential genealogy, the same as with any other genealogy, you start with a focused goal. Find the question. What question do you need to have answered? You search broadly. You don't just search vital records, for example. Then you interpret the records and the information, record it all, write it down, figure out whether it's accurate or not. Then the fourth thing you do is correlate the facts and draw a conclusion. And then the fifth is to write down the results and share them. So step one is your goal. And in this case, it will definitely be identity and relationship. Almost always inferential genealogy helps you find relationships and identities. Who among several candidates was your ancestor, for example? This is one question you could ask. I have several people with the same name in the same area. Who among these people is my ancestor? Who are the people that he or she, this ancestor, were related to? And so you want to be really specific with these questions. You don't just ask a general question. I want to find more about the Maloney family, for example. So this is an example for my own genealogy. Who were the parents of Mary Maloney, born about 1850, who married Henry Potter? Yes, but I don't think he's the magician. In 1870 in Lancashire. I had 4 candidates, all from Ireland, who were all living in the same general area in Lancashire that Henry Potter was living in. And there were several candidates out of his too. So I had to first narrow down my Henry Potter and then narrow down his wife and then find out which parents actually were hers. So I used inferential genealogy to do this by looking at a bunch of different sources and so on. So there are several little things on step 2 that you want to look at and think about. The first thing is just make it broad, okay? You're not just looking for records, you're looking for things that say anything at all about your ancestors. So the first thing you're going to look at is fans. Make sure you look at fans. That's friends, associates, neighbors, and other people in the community with the same or different surnames. So friends, associates, neighbors, and surnames. Those are the fans. Any of those things that could be associated with your ancestor is what you're looking for. Second thing is the time period. You can't just search during his lifetime or during what you think might be his lifetime. You need to search both forward and backward in time. And in some cases that may be up to a century. Geographical location, start in the location you're most certain of. Okay, if you think you know where he was born or you think you know where he lived, start that in that location and then go out from there. You can look in gazetteers. That's what I generally suggest you do. Look in gazetteers and then look outward from that area if you don't find him right away. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about fans. Fans are clusters of community relationships. This is really important. So you're going to look at all the surrounding friends, associates, neighbors, and surnames in any document that you find where your ancestor may be mentioned. Look at the neighbors and associates in land records, land purchases, plat maps, censuses, tax records, and family directories. There are lots, especially in German, you're going to find address books and family genealogy books that you can look in. You look at everybody that might possibly be associated with them. Don't dismiss or ignore a pertinent record, even if the person's not named in the record, because it may be a relative of that person. So be careful not to just throw something out because you don't find your ancestor's name in there. Make note of pastors, godparents, witnesses, partners, suppliers, executors of wills, and similar community members on documents. They could be an associate. Extend beyond your ancestor's surname. Assume that anyone listed in the record or document could be a relative or at least an associate. And always investigate anyone living in the same household. And I didn't write this down, but what you probably want to do on a census record, for example, is you look up 10 people at least, down 10 people at least, so that you're looking in the same neighborhood. And investigate all those people, see who they are. I found numerous times where people were living very close to each other in the same neighborhood, not necessarily in the same house or the same domicile. So always investigate anyone living on the census within at least 10 houses above and below. Even more so, I mean, you can go out even further than that. Another thing is, remember, a lot of times people migrated in groups. Think about the Mormon pioneers, for example. So neighbors often knew each other when they would move from one place to another. They would move as a group sometimes, especially true in the United States. So ship's manifests can include an entire group of associated people. So look at all the ship's manifests. Don't just look for the one name. Look at the whole manifest. Look and see what's up and down again on that manifest. Even the crew sometimes. I found people in crew lists. Wagon trains may have included several related families. So check the entire wagon train list for relationships. Again, I've done that and found relatives within the wagon train lists. If an ancestor lived in a parish, a town, a county, or near a parish, a county, a town, or a state line, anywhere where there's a border, look for people on either side of that line, because those borders are absolutely, of course, artificial. They don't really mean anything. In cemeteries, pay attention to the gravestones anywhere near your, if it's a huge graveyard, maybe closer by, but if it's a small graveyard, look at every single grave. Look at the cemetery listings for the whole graveyard to find and see if there are any other family members, or at least people with similar surnames or surnames that you know are related to your family. So that's just some places. That's not even everything you can look at, of course. As for time period and locations, as I mentioned, research at least a decade before the targeted person's birth and a decade after the targeted person's death, because you're going to find names there that may be related to that person some way or another. Research records both from local to national. You'll be surprised, especially in the United States research, you'll find sometimes records in the National Archives for things that you wouldn't have expected to find if you looked on a local level. Search records in the surrounding jurisdictions and locations, as I mentioned, just go outward in a concentric circles. Don't assume that the person won't be in records from other locations, because maybe they got sued by somebody in another court district. And if you don't look in other locations that are fairly nearby, you may not find that. Don't assume that records from a particular location won't be stored in a different location or a more distant repository. So don't just limit yourself to local stuff, but be really, 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 really careful. I cannot tell you often enough, don't fall into the same name syndrome, okay? Because that's the worst thing, is to think, oh, this person has the same name. It must be the same person, or, oh, this is the same place, when it's really a different place, just has maybe the same town name. Like, for example, there's a town that was recently researched by someone I was consulting with. 20 different towns in Germany had the exact same name. So be really careful of same name syndrome for both last names and for place names. Okay, so research across boundaries and state lines, as I mentioned, especially if the person lived near a boundary. Look at land records in surrounding communities and areas. People might have bought land there that they didn't actually live on, or that they didn't actually farm. They may have bought land in another community and rented it out, leased it to someone, or sold it again, or lots of things could happen with land. Be especially aware of wills and grants from other people in the area. So if they got a grant from someone, who was that person? If they gave their jewelry to somebody, who was that? Find them. Even if they don't have the same name, it could be a grandchild. You just never know. So look and see who those people were and research them, okay? So you can see there's a lot to do. It's not that simple, but it's actually a lot of fun. So where do you search for all these inferential facts then? And the answer is everywhere. Everywhere you could possibly think of, search for inferential facts. So here is a list, and you don't have to copy this down. I'll give the handout to Elder Anderton, and he will have it available on the website, on the Family History Library website for you. So you don't have to copy these down, but you can look in histories. There are so many histories that have been written, and you can find your ancestor in a county history, in a city history, in a borough history. And a lot of these little small areas have people who are interested in those histories and have compiled them and written them down. Don't take their word for it, but because I have found mistakes in these histories myself, but at least they can give you a jumping off point, and they can also provide a lot of information in the background of what your ancestor was doing and where things were happening there. Maps and gazetteers are absolutely fantastic. Please look for those. You can find those on the Family Search Research Wiki. You can find links to those, and you can also just look them up on Google. I use Google Maps all the time. Even though it's modern, most of the places haven't changed all that much in the last couple hundred years. If you're doing really ancient research, which is difficult, and then you can't really use Google Maps as easily, but you can still use them even for old research in the 1700s, particularly for Europe. Libraries and archives. Don't neglect libraries and archives. They can be so fantastic. Let me give you an example. The library up in Logan for the Utah State University Library, they have a huge collection of just ephemera documents from people that lived in the area that people have donated to the library, of diaries, letters. My husband found the minutes of a priesthood meeting that his grandfather bore his testimony at. I mean, you can't get any better than that. So don't neglect university libraries, college libraries. I have found things in our BYU University Special Collections Library of a journal, the handwritten journal of one of my great-great-grandmother's children. So it's just fantastic. Local libraries will even have a lot of stuff sometimes. I know there's stuff here in Provo, down at the museum library that they have in Provo. Newspapers are a fantastic source for finding out what your ancestors were doing when they got married. They have obituaries. I found out that my great-great-grandfather had a fantastic voice and sang all over the valley in Hannaford, Utah, for people's funerals by looking at obituaries. Military records and websites about battles, leaders, and units. You will be amazed at how many battles and military units have their own websites. So do look at that, and also look at the National Park website, the National Park Archives for the Civil War. They're fantastic. There are lots of occupational websites. For example, in Lancashire, many of my ancestors were in mining. I have found them on lists of accidents in mines. I've found them on lists of explosions in mines that killed them, unfortunately. So you can, that's not the only occupation you can find websites about from the olden times. There are academic historical journals. Those are a little more specialized. You can find them on Google. Go to museums. There's a museum in Heber City that has pictures of my great-great-grandfather and great-great-grandmother on their walls. So historical societies are a fantastic source of information. You can write to them, and they're usually really happy to tell you what they have in their collection that might have anything to do with your ancestor. Cemeteries and cemetery records are a really good source of names and dates. Land and plat records, that's a whole class. You can spend 2 or 3 classes on land records. So much information on land records, so very, very much. And the GLOW, the land office for the United States, has a lot of stuff on there. You can find things in church histories, not just LDS church histories, but other types of church histories in other religions. This is the LDS church journal history. The church has a lot of names in there of people and what they were, how they were associated with the church. I found a lot of information looking in ward records, baptismal records. There you can look on the early church information file. You can look in the membership card index, patriarchal blessing index. These are church, LDS church things that you could look at, but there's a lot of stuff in other religions that they kept parish records and histories as well. Look up the parish itself and see what there is available, because some of them actually have their own websites. Will and probate records are extremely important. Those are one of the most important records you can look at. Court records and cases are also very important. Divorce cases can be very, very helpful. Town directories and phone books. This is true, especially in Germany. Town directories in Germany are fantastic. The Familienbücher, for example, is what they are usually called, or Ortsfamilienbücher. Family records, diaries, and journals are perfectly valid. Those are perfectly valid sources, and don't say, oh, this isn't an official record. Doesn't matter. They can be exactly what you need. Ships, passengers, and crews, migration, immigration records, passports, and naturalization records. These can usually be found in national archives. Parish chest records in Britain are really important. They will give you the information, if they're available, of illegitimacy and the father's name, which is often, in fact, never really on the birth record or the christening record. But you can find it in the parish chest records a lot of times if they're available. Census records, of course, they're like the basis. That's the basis of everything you do. Family search and family tree memories are something to look at. If you haven't looked at the memories on some of your more distant relatives that you're looking for a direct ancestor, I would definitely do that. There are timelines on Ancestry, there are timelines on Family Tree, there are timelines on a lot of the other public family tree websites. There are ethnic and community-oriented websites. For example, if you have American Indian ancestry, there are websites that are just about that tribe. That you maybe have been associated with. There are a lot of ethnic websites that will have histories of peoples, histories of cultures outside of the United States as well. So don't be afraid to look on Google. It's one of your best sources. So when you've done all that research and you've got all this stuff together, the next thing you need to do is evaluate and analyze the evidence. So this is basically what you have to do, is look for information such as proximity, how close were people in time and in space. Naming patterns, did people name their children one name over generations? And put things into a chronological order. Look for patterns and parallels across records that have the same person, event, or property within certain records. Look at paradoxes. Sometimes you look at something and say, this can't be right. This is just not right. It can't be right. And yet, as it turns out, it can be right sometimes. The paradox will solve itself if you look at enough records, and you'll figure out why. Look at omissions. Negative evidence is valid evidence. If he's not on a tax record, it could be because he died. If he's not on a tax record, it could be because he wasn't 21 yet. So it can help you, depending on the place, you have to figure out, you have to find out their laws and so on, but they can actually help you. Omissions can help as much as the actual records themselves that have the names and things on it. Look at terminology. Plat land and reveal neighbors and co-heirs. Don't just look at the land of your own ancestor. Consider both indirect and direct evidence, as I was saying, including negative and circumstantial evidence. Any address that you find on a record, look at the map of the area and find out where it was. You can, a lot of times I found actual homes, houses of my ancestors on Google Street. They're still there, and it's still the house that they were living in 1840. So there's a lot of stuff you can do on maps. Find out what the proximity of that address is to what you know of your ancestor, and it may be somebody that's close to them or related to them. Find out why a document was created. This is very important. Why was this document made? And what laws, regulations, and customs govern this document? We can't just assume that all the laws in all the places are exactly the same. Like I said, maybe a 21-year-old didn't pay taxes in certain areas, but maybe they did in others. Consider the possibility that the record's been altered. A lot of times records got changed, especially birth records. They were changed later on by a family coming back in and putting in a name or whatever. Or something happened that some death record got put in wrong and things got changed. Sometimes things are just downright unfactual. Sometimes you just can't take it as fact, especially things like censuses. I mean, census, people lie on the census all the time, or they just get put down wrong. Things get put down incorrectly. And then the last thing you're going to look for is to resolve conflicting information. You can't take conflicting information and say, oh, okay, this is right. You have to look at all of it, the conflicting information, and check your assumptions. Check your assumptions at the door. Don't even make assumptions unless you're sure that the assumption is true and you have evidence to back it. And we'll talk about that in a second. How do I organize my research for ease of evaluation? Okay, so when you're looking at something, you go, oh, I've got all this stuff. What am I going to do with it all? How am I going to figure it all out? What's good and what's bad? So this is just some ideas of how to do this. So use a matrix or a spreadsheet or a table, depending on what you're most comfortable with, and you can make it up yourself, or they have them online everywhere, to compare sources, people, dates, places, and property. Such a tool will allow you to look at several pieces of information at the same time. And you can also put multiple people's records, the same type of records on from different people. And then you can look and you find those patterns, you can find those parallels if you use a spreadsheet particularly. I like spreadsheets. A timeline. Put each document you have on a timeline, when it was created and what the time period was that the dates cover in there. And then that way it's easy to find the discrepancies among the documents, and then you can decide which one you think would possibly be best according to which date is most often seen, or which date is the most accurate record that you might have. It could be that you'll eliminate, like I did, 3 of the Mary Maloney's and say, oh yeah, this is not his mother, this is not her father. You can do that too. Plotting a map. Take a historical map, you can print it out or do it however you like, and put those locations where your ancestors' records are found. Where did you find those records, and the dates that you found them. And you can also plot associated people on that same map. And you can use different colors, or you can be very creative in doing these things. The next thing to do is to look for the forms if you don't want to make them up yourself. You can find them online. These are some of the places where you can find really good forms, but you can make them up yourself. So you'll be able to find this on the handout. You don't necessarily have to copy it down. So once you've got all this stuff organized and you're looking at it, how do you then avoid the false inferences? And these are some of the clues, okay? Trust no record or index in isolation, especially don't trust indexes. Don't trust records in isolation. Don't take one record and say, okay, this is that person. Sometimes you'll be right. In fact, probably most of the time you may be right, depending on the time period. But if you take an index and say, okay, this is the person, and you don't look at the original record, you cannot be certain that that is true. All right, can't be certain that that person was indexed correctly. Consult the original records. If it's at all possible, always look at original records, and be suspicious of compiled genealogies, because they are so often not correct. And that's true whether it's family search, other people on Ancestry, Find My Past, My Heritage, any of these compiled ancestries, even the Ortsfamilienbücher. Don't take them as gospel truth. Recognize assumptions as assumptions, okay? And don't make an assumption if you can't defend it. If you don't have any evidence, don't think the assumption has to be true. You have to have evidence to make an assumption true. Don't wish your ancestor into existence. Don't wish that you were related to Abraham Lincoln and then try your desperate best to make sure that that's true. Don't do that. Just find the ancestors that you have. They're just as good and as interesting as any famous person. And even if it's not a famous person, don't wish that person into existence so that you'll be done with that person. Just make sure it's the right person. Don't commit the mistake of same name syndrome. We talked about that. Consult as many sources as possible. Avoid shortcuts and lazy research. It's easy to do. It's really easy to do, but don't do it. Evaluate the quality of every source you consult and all evidence that each source contains. So evaluate the quality. Not all sources are created equal. So make sure that you look at it and see, how reliable is this source and why was it created? Corroborate secondary sources, that is sources that somebody else is giving as their source for something, with other independently created sources. Okay, so if you only have secondary sources, make sure you look at as many of them as you can and corroborate them together so that you can make sure that you get the most accurate one. And then accept an inference only when it meets the GPS, the genealogical proof standard, which is the sum of source-cited evidence, including resolved contradictions, not just contradictions, but resolved contradictions from all potentially applicable sources, and then explained in writing. And that's the next thing we'll talk about. Step 5, write down your results and your conclusions and share them. I didn't say share, but that's as important or more important than even writing them down. So write up and share the results of your research. You can use the collaboration buttons on Family Search to share this information, and I always recommend you do that. If you find a reason why somebody is that person and you don't want it to be changed, tell the people who are coming onto Family Search to change it. Don't do that because this is the correct information. If you don't put that down, they won't know, and they'll just change it, and then you're going to get, upset because you have to go back and change it again. So make sure that you tell people why the information, that's why those boxes are there. Why? Explain why this is a good source. Explain why this is a true source. Include those rationales and put in negative evidence as well. Contradictory evidence, you can say, I know there's this and this, but this one seems to be the most clearly accurate, so this is the one I'm going with. You can write your evidence down, and we'll have a class sometime in the fall, in September, about how to do this part. Narratives, write a discussion of your findings in a paragraph, an essay, or book. List, make a list of the evidence you found that leads you to your conclusion. You just put it in a list form. Timeline, again, do the same thing, only this time you're just going to list the evidence in chronological order. Why it can or can't be proof of the answer. This is what that timeline would be for. A table or a spreadsheet, if you use that to say this is my conclusion, then you're going to put your evidence in the rows or columns and highlight the patterns that answer your research questions so that other people, when you share it with them, can see what you did. Or your maps, the same way. Plot the pertinent locations for your ancestor on a map, attach the dates, and show from that, in that way, why you know. Now, Thomas Jones, who's I think he's my genealogical hero. He said, in each case, the researcher points out patterns, parallels, and conflicts, similarities and dissimilarities, and points of agreement and disagreement in the evidence pertaining to a research question or hypothesis. So that's the important part of the writing down. Make sure it's as correct as you can possibly make it. And so when you actually share your research, document each conclusion carefully and as completely as possible. And remember, this is not your family. There are hundreds of people who this family belongs to. It's not just you. So you're doing this research as much for other people as you are for yourself. And you're saving other people their time and their trouble if you do it correctly. So for me, this is a service to do, to share the research properly. Include all the relevant facts, information, and research conclusions. Don't skimp on them. Give everything you have. Don't add someone to your tree unless you're positive that he or she belongs there. If you have a question about it and you want to add a person to family search and you're not sure, make sure you say, maybe in the live sketch so other people will see it right away instead of having to go to the collaborative place. Say, I'm not sure this person belongs here, but I'm going to put them here just in case somebody else can maybe help me find some information. But don't just stick it in there and in your tree unless you tell yourself or somebody else, I don't know for sure that this person's correct. So the bottom line of inferential genealogy is to make correct and accurate inferences. Don't just draw conclusions from assumptions. But if you do this correctly, you'll find more of your own ancestors. You'll ensure that your family tree is full of the right people and goes in the right direction. You'll solve some puzzles. You'll get to know your ancestors in a wonderful personal way. And you'll help other research eliminate or find their ancestors as well. So please do it. It's a wonderful way to research and you'll enjoy it. So for more information, you can go to these are, if you type these into the family search, you'll find inferential genealogy, and the inferential genealogy course handout is on that inferential genealogy page in the family search wiki. So type those in either to Google or family search wiki, and then type the genealogy deducing ancestor, inferential genealogy deducing ancestors identities indirectly. If you type that right into Google, you'll get it. You can get that, and it's really useful and helpful. There's a PDF there that's got a lot of information, some of which is the same type of thing that I shared. But there you go. So I hope you enjoyed our class, and if you have any questions, please ask them.
Sister Sorensen, how can they get your handout or the materials you present? Is there some kind of a format that we can make available to them?
Yeah, so I always send my handouts to the BYU Family History Library as PDFs, and they should be available on the same page that you'll find the archives for so this class itself will be there as well.
Okay.
The handouts are available on the page for the Sunday classes. Anybody who does these classes who has a handout, and I want to give you this handout because it's got so much information on those, on where to look. So it'll be
yeah, just send it to the same place then, and
awesome.
We'd like to encourage everyone to become familiar with our website. It on the blue screen that we showed at the beginning, it has our website, and there's a wealth of information there, as well as hundreds and hundreds of past recorded classes that you can watch over again if you missed something, or if you missed some of them are series. And so if you miss number 4, number 2 or something, you can go back and fill in that gap. So we'd encourage you to become familiar with our website. There's on the left side of our website, there's something called research. And under that particular tab, there is more information that you could ever read in a lifetime. So and then we'd also remind you that any question you may have, we have missionaries and the hours posted on the website that are available virtually during those hours, and we'd be happy to try to help you with any question that pertains to family history. And thank you, Sister Sorensen, for your time, and we will see you next week, everyone.
Thank you.